You're not going to learn how to structure a research paper by believing what I tell you today. You're going to have to do as I say, right? Repeatedly. It's a discipline, it's a kind of training. So structure isn't just a thing that you learn and you just take everything you know and squeeze it into. Structure is a thing you learn how to establish. So let's get started with a quotation from the great American poet William Carlos Williams, who said very cleverly, "A poem is a machine made of words." There's another joke that's kind of similar that Mallory May was asked by his famous painter friend Degas. He was asked, Degas said, I'd love to write poems. I have such great ideas. And Mallory May said, a poem is not made out of ideas. It is made of words, right? It's a similar point that's being made here. Think of your task not as some sublime kind of task of, expressing your ideas, which is what you're doing, that's fine, but that's not going to give you the structure you need. What you need is to think of this as you're making something out of words, and the thing that you're making has to work, right? You're trying to make something that's going to produce a predictable effect in the mind of your reader, so you're trying to set up a structure that's going to work. One of the things that happened when I was doing the research for this, when I was preparing for this, is that I realized that the word machine, if you've ever looked this up, the word machine actually just means structure, right? It's a structure of any kind. But we've come to think of a machine as a structure that has a particular kind of function, right? So it's an arrangement of things. It's a structure, but it's geared, as it were, to do something, to produce a particular effect, right? And so let's think about our projects in this way as well. It's a thing, it's made out of words, but we're going to structure it in such a way that once you set it moving, once you get it started, it does something in particular, it goes somewhere. Right? And we're going to look at that. We're going to really keep that in mind as we're working through this. So just remember, that's what you're doing. You're putting words together to make paragraphs. You're putting the paragraphs together to make an essay. So how are we going to do that? Well, never start with a blank page. It is a state of zero information. Right? There's no differences in this. It is the total heat death. This is what the universe is going to look like in whatever, 1 trillion years when the heat death sets in. Nothing, no differences, everything is the same. It could be black, it could be white, it doesn't matter, right? There's no differences. So how do you fix that problem? This is your first problem of structure, is getting rid of this chaos, right? Imposing some structure that you can use. And there's a trick I'm going to teach you. It's very simple. Here it goes. You put a line through it. Right? You take your blank page, you're thinking, I've got to get this planned, so I'm going to put a line through it, and what this creates is a top and a bottom, if you will, a before and an after, a beginning and an end, something like that. And this is going so well, right? You're feeling so much more in control of the space now, right? Because we've got a line in it. We're going to do it again, right? Whoa, look at that. Now we're really feeling like we've got a structured space. Now we can think about what are we going to do in this space. And I think you all know what we've just done, right? We've just carved out kind of the basic form of any research paper, right? It's going to have an introduction, it's going to have a conclusion, right? And it's going to have something in the middle, right? You didn't come here to learn that, right? But it's a nice place to start. This is a minimal structure, and you have it even if you're writing like a 5-paragraph essay. Even if you're writing a 3-pager, you can think in these terms. I need to start, I need to do something in the middle, and I need to end. So since this is going so well, we can do it again, right? We can do it several times. We can just carve up that space, and we're already feeling like, well, this task is becoming more manageable, right? If I thought I had a certain amount of weeks to do this, I can start counting how many weeks I'll have for each part. If I'm even more planning oriented, I've counted hours, and I can start distributing the hours. And since I've said it's going to be about 60, 40, 80 paragraphs, something like that, right? I can start distributing paragraphs, right? And the question then is, what is this area that we're talking about? It's, of course, an outline, right? Now we have an outline of our project. This is a very generic one. You may come up with different ones for your projects, right? But it's roughly the kinds of things we're going to need. We'll talk about how to distinguish these different sections. And you'll notice that big anxiety-provoking spot in that hole in the middle where there's still chaos because there's more blank space there, there's more whiteness there than we had before. So we can actually just carve that up as well. All right, so now all we're really saying is that the analysis is going to be about 3 times as long as the method section and the theory section. And what you'll also notice here is these are decisions you can make. You can move those dotted lines and those blue lines around as your project requires. Maybe some of you are writing very theory-heavy things, and so you have longer theory sections. But this is all stuff that you can plan, and what you're noticing here is that you're getting a sense of proportion, right? You're making decisions about how much each of these sections is going to fill, right? Going well so far. We're feeling already more relaxed, right? We're feeling like our space, it's not anything can happen now, right? Lots of different things are going to happen, but we've bounded them and we've given them names. And one of the best ways to start to understand something is to give them a name. We're going to get really advanced now and add a new dimension, right? And carve up the space in a completely different way. And what I'm going to try to do is go through each of these sections in 2 modes, right? I'm going to try to think about how can we distinguish the sections of your papers in 2 different ways. And roughly speaking, we could talk about this in different ways: content and intention. But I'm just going to try to talk about this mainly in terms of your sources and the purpose you have in writing these sections. So in order to decide whether or not I'm working on my background or my theory or my method section, right, I'm going to ask myself, what am I basing the things I'm saying on? Right? I'm going to ask myself, where am I getting this? Right? What's my foundation for saying this? So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about what are we trying to do with this particular section. And I think you all probably have been told at some point, when you're asking yourself how to write something, always ask yourself who your reader is. Always try to imagine your reader, right? The reader is going to tell you how to write. And I think some of you are thinking, well, my reader is the examiner, my reader is the teacher. Try not to do that. What that does is it creates a reader that is much smarter than you, right? Much more knowledgeable than you. So you have this person that can actually contribute meaning to what you're saying. If you really want to talk about bringing about an effect, an academic, scholarly effect, think of your writing as always writing for other knowledgeable people, which is to say people at the same level, right? So imagine the smartest, most engaged, most serious students in your class, right? Somebody who's read all the required reading. And then when you're making this decision about what's my purpose here, you're trying to think, how am I going to explain this to the most serious student in my cohort, right? That's really that's what the purpose is going to be about. That's how we're going to think about that. Does that make sense? So on the one hand, we're going to think about what did I read or where did I get this? And on the other hand, we're going to think, what am I doing to my reader, right? And my reader is this familiar but serious, admirable, a sort of a familiar but admirable peer, right? That's who you're trying to write for. I think you know what the introduction and conclusions are for, but they are very good to start with because they make this difference between the reader very clear. One of the things that we notice immediately about the source of the introduction and the conclusion is that it's really just the basis on which you write your introduction and your conclusion is the rest of the whole project, right? So you've got this entire research paper and you're going to be introducing it. So your basis for writing the introduction, the sources behind your introduction, is actually the rest of the paper. And the same goes for the conclusion. It just points upwards, right? So it points back to what you've just been through. Right? So if you keep that in mind, that you don't need to know anything other than what the rest of the paper says to write your introduction and conclusion, right? Anybody who wrote the paper, right, knows enough to write the introduction and the conclusion, right? And this is also why it's a great idea to do a good job of that introduction and conclusion, because it's a very good predictor of your grade. If you can write an introduction and conclusion really well, you probably have the knowledge and skills you need to write the entire paper, right? But there's a difference between the introduction and the conclusion, and it's an obvious one, right? The introduction tells the paper is about, assuming the reader hasn't read it yet. Whereas the conclusion tells the reader what the paper is about on the assumption that the reader has just read the paper. Right? So it's a different rhetorical posture you're going to have there. You don't just want to say the same things, you want to say it at the highest possible technical level. Right? And we'll talk about that, what that exactly means. Right? What you're basically trying to do is get from the introduction to the conclusion, but you want to make sure the conclusion is higher up. Right? It's intellectually more difficult, but it says the same thing. Right? It says the same thing to a more prepared reader. So the only difference is really what's happened to the reader in the meantime, right? Which is your research paper.